The thing about being awake at 3 in the morning is that you start to trust the silence. You believe you're the only conscious mind for blocks in every direction, and when you find out that isn't true, something very old and very deep in your brain wakes up too. Tonight we're looking at 3 stories from ordinary people who were awake when they shouldn't have been, and who slowly realized that someone else was too. These aren't ghost stories. There's nothing supernatural here. What makes them disturbing is how real they are, how quietly they begin, and how none of them end with a clean answer. Sometimes the most unsettling thing in the world is simply another person in a place where no person should be. Let's begin. I never should have been awake. That's the part I keep coming back to. If I had just gone to sleep at a normal hour, I never would have noticed anything, and I'd still be living in that apartment. It was a Tuesday in November. I remember that because I had called in sick to work that day. Not because I was actually sick, but because I hadn't slept the night before. I deal with insomnia in phases. It comes and goes. That week, it had come back hard, and by Tuesday night, I was running on maybe 4 hours of sleep, spread across 2 days. I was sitting on my couch at around 1:30 in the morning, half watching something on my laptop, half staring at the wall, when I heard a thud from the apartment above me. That wouldn't normally mean anything. People drop things. The building was old, a 3-story brick walk-up in the eastern part of Milwaukee, and sound traveled easily through the floors and walls. But the apartment above mine had been empty for over 2 months. The last tenant, an older man I never really spoke to, had moved out at the end of August. I'd seen the landlord show it a couple of times in September, but no one had taken it. No moving truck had come. No new name had appeared on the mailbox downstairs. The unit was vacant. I muted my laptop and listened. Nothing. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing outside. I told myself the sound was probably the building settling. Old buildings make noises. Pipes shift. Radiators bang. I unmuted my laptop and tried to focus on the screen. About 20 minutes later, I heard it again. Not a thud this time. A creak. Long, slow, like someone shifting their weight on a floorboard. Then another. Then silence. I sat very still. The thing about old buildings is that yes, they do make noises, but those noises don't move. A settling foundation groans from the same spot. A pipe knocks in the same wall. What I was hearing moved. It started near what would be the kitchen above me and traveled slowly toward the front of the unit, roughly above my living room, roughly above where I was sitting. I put my laptop aside and stood up. I felt a little foolish. I walked to my front door and opened it, leaning into the hallway. The stairwell was dark. The hall light on my floor was on, casting that flat yellow glow that cheap bulbs give off. I looked up the stairs toward the 3rd floor. Nothing. No light from under the door of the unit above mine. No sound. I stood there for what felt like a full minute. Then I went back inside, locked my door, and sat back down. For the next hour, nothing happened. I started to fall asleep on the couch, which felt like a small miracle given the week I'd had. My eyes were closing. My breathing had slowed. Then I heard the footsteps. Not creaks this time. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, crossing from one side of the apartment above to the other. They stopped near what I estimated was the center of the living room up there, directly above me, then nothing. I lay on the couch with my eyes open. I didn't move. I don't know why I felt like I shouldn't move, but I did. Something about the rhythm of the footsteps, how measured they were, made me feel like whoever was up there was being very careful. And that made me feel like I should be careful too. The next morning, I contacted my landlord. I sent him a text asking whether someone had moved into the unit above me. He replied a few hours later and said no. He said no one had signed a lease and the unit was still listed. He asked why. I told him I'd heard noises. He said it was probably the heat kicking on and that the radiators in that unit hadn't been bled in a while. That should have been the end of it. I wanted it to be the end of it. But that night, Wednesday night, I was awake again. 1:15 in the morning, and the footsteps came back. The same pattern. Kitchen area to living room area, then a stop, then silence. But this time, something new happened. After the footsteps stopped, I heard a faint sound I can only describe as tapping. Not on the floor, on the wall. A light, irregular tapping, like someone drumming their fingers on plaster. I texted my landlord again the next morning. This time I asked if he could check the unit. He said he'd send someone. I don't know if he ever did. No one contacted me. No one knocked on my door. Thursday night, I didn't hear anything. I actually slept. Friday night, nothing. I thought it was over. I started telling myself it really had been the radiators, even though I knew radiators don't walk across rooms. Saturday night, I woke up at around 2 in the morning. I hadn't had trouble falling asleep, but something pulled me out of it. I lay in bed in the dark and I listened. The apartment above was silent, but when I looked at my bedroom door, which I always leave halfway open, I noticed the light in the hallway. Not the building hallway, my hallway. The light in my own apartment, the one over the kitchen sink that I always leave on as a nightlight, was off. I always leave it on. I had left it on before bed. I was certain. I never heard footsteps above me again after that night. I moved out 6 weeks later. The landlord told me he'd finally gone up to check the vacant unit in December, a full month after my complaints. He told me the deadbolt on that apartment's door had been broken for some time. He said it looked like it had been forced from the inside. I don't know what that means. I've decided I don't want to. I used to work the night shift at a commercial print shop outside of Dayton. It was a big building, almost warehouse-sized, with 2 large Heidelberg presses, a cutting room, a binding area, and a set of offices in the front that no one used after 6 p.m. My shift ran from 10 at night to 6 in the morning. Most nights it was just me and one other guy, Marcus, running one of the presses for a standing newspaper contract. But on Sundays, Marcus was off, and I worked alone. I didn't mind it. The press mostly ran itself once it was set up, and I'd do walk-through checks every 30 minutes or so, making sure the paper feed was clean and the ink coverage was even. Between checks, I'd sit in the break room, read, eat my lunch, whatever. The building was loud when the press was running and absolutely silent when it wasn't. I'd been doing that shift for almost a year with no issues. One Sunday night in January, I was doing a walkthrough at around 2 in the morning. The press was running fine. I walked the loop I always walked. Press room, cutting room, binding area, back hallway, break room. When I passed through the back hallway, I noticed one of the office doors at the front of the building was open. Not wide open, maybe 6 inches. I could see it from the hallway because the hall runs straight through to the front, and there was a small amount of light coming from inside the office. Not overhead light. More like the glow of a monitor or a small desk lamp. I stopped walking and looked at it. We never used those offices at night. I hadn't been in them. The doors were always closed. I assumed they were locked. Though honestly, I'd never checked. I told myself someone had probably left a computer on and the door hadn't latched properly. The building had an HVAC system that cycled on and off, and the pressure change sometimes pushed doors open if they weren't fully closed. That had happened in the break room before. It made sense. I walked to the office door and looked inside. There was a desk, a chair, a computer. The computer screen was on, showing the Windows login screen. The screensaver must have been bumped somehow. Maybe the HVAC vibration. I moved the mouse, and the login prompt appeared. I didn't have credentials for it, so I just turned off the monitor, pulled the door closed until it clicked, and went back to my rounds. About 45 minutes later, I passed through the back hallway again. The door was open. Same door. Same 6 inches. The monitor was on again. I stood in the hallway for a long time. The press was running in the other room, and I could feel its low vibration through the floor. I walked to the door again and pushed it open wider. The office was empty. Same desk, same chair. The monitor showed the login screen. But this time, I noticed something I hadn't noticed before. The chair was in a slightly different position. Before, it had been pushed under the desk. Now it was pulled out, angled slightly, as though someone had been sitting in it and had stood up. I turned off the monitor. I pushed the chair back under the desk. I closed the door, and this time I pressed on it hard to make sure the latch caught. I heard it click. I tested it with a light pull. It held. I went back to the press room and sat down on the stool I kept by the control panel. I didn't go back to the break room. I just sat near the press where the noise was steady and constant, and I watched the paper feed, cycle after cycle. At around 3:30, I realized I needed to do another walkthrough. I'd been putting it off. I got up and walked the loop. Press room was fine. Cutting room was fine. Binding area was fine. I turned the corner into the back hallway. The door was closed, but there was light under it. Not the faint glow of a monitor this time. Brighter. The overhead fluorescent had been turned on. I did not go to that door. I want to be honest about that. I stood in the hallway and watched the light under the door for probably 2 minutes. I listened. The press was running, so it was hard to hear subtle noises, but between the rhythmic thump of the cylinders, in the brief gaps of relative quiet, I thought I heard something. A very faint, very ordinary sound. Breathing. Not heavy breathing, not labored, just normal, calm breathing from someone sitting in a room. I walked back to the press room. I picked up my phone and called my supervisor's cell. He didn't answer. I called the front office line, knowing nobody would pick up, and nobody did. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't know what I would say. I hear breathing behind a door. A chair moved. I stayed in the press room for the rest of the shift. I didn't do any more walkthroughs. When the morning crew started arriving around 5:30, I told the first guy through the door, a pressman named Dale, that I thought someone might have been in the offices overnight. He looked at me like I was overtired, which I probably was. We walked to the front offices together. Every door was closed. He tried the one I'd been watching. It was locked. He didn't have a key. We looked through the small window in the door. Lights were off. Monitor was off. Chair was pushed neatly under the desk. Dale shrugged and said the building was old and weird at night. I kept working Sundays for another 3 months before I transferred to a weekday shift. During that time, I never saw the door open again, but twice on 2 separate Sunday nights, I found the break room coffee maker still warm when I arrived at 10, as though someone had used it within the hour. I never found out who. I'm not sure there's a version of the answer that would make me feel better. My wife is a heavy sleeper. Once she's out, she's gone until her alarm goes off at 6:30. I've always envied that. I wake up at the smallest thing, a branch against the window, the house creaking, even a change in the wind. So when I tell you I was awake at 3 in the morning on a Friday in October, you should know that wasn't unusual for me. What was unusual was what I saw. We live in a ranch-style house on a half-acre lot in rural Maryland. It's not remote, exactly. There are neighbors, but they're spaced out. The nearest house is maybe 200 yards down the road. Behind our house is a wide, flat backyard that ends at a tree line. Beyond the tree line is farmland that hasn't been actively farmed in years. It's quiet out here. That's why we moved. I was in the kitchen getting water. The kitchen window faces the backyard. We have a motion sensor floodlight mounted above the back door. It covers most of the yard. It turns on if a deer walks through, if a raccoon gets into the trash cans, if anything larger than a cat moves within about 40 feet of the house. I've seen it trigger hundreds of times. I know what sets it off and how long it stays on. 30 seconds, then it clicks off. That night, I was standing at the sink filling a glass when the floodlight came on. I looked out the window instinctively. The yard was empty. Just grass, the kids' swing set off to the left, the shed in the back corner. Nothing moved. I watched for a few seconds. Then the light clicked off. I figured a cat or a possum had passed through the edge of the sensor range. I stood there drinking my water in the dark. About 90 seconds later, the light came on again. I looked out. Empty yard. Same view. Nothing. The light stayed on for its 30 seconds and went off. I set my glass down and leaned closer to the window. I was looking at the yard more carefully now. The grass was mid-length, overdue for a mow. The swing set was still. The shed door was closed. The tree line at the back was a solid dark wall. Nothing out of place. The light came on a third time. This time, I studied the sensor's range. The floodlight is angled to cover the area from about 15 feet off the back wall of the house to about 45 feet out. It doesn't reach the tree line. So whatever was triggering, it was in the yard, not at the edges. I watched the full 30 seconds. Nothing moved. The light went off. I thought about the sensor. Maybe it was malfunctioning. They do that when the bulb is going bad or when the sensitivity is set too high. I'd adjusted it before. I decided I'd look at it in the morning and went back toward the bedroom. I was halfway down the hall when the light came on again. I could see the glow reach around the corner from the kitchen, throwing faint white light across the hallway floor. I stopped and stood there. I counted to 30 in my head. The light went off. I went back to the kitchen. I stood to the side of the window this time, just barely looking out at an angle. I don't know why I did that. I don't know what instinct told me not to stand directly in front of the glass, but I didn't. The light came on, and this time I saw it. Not a person exactly, a shape. At the far edge of the floodlight's reach, maybe 40 feet out, right where the light began to fade into darkness. It was low to the ground, and at first I thought it was a deer bedding down in the yard, but it didn't move the way a deer would. It was still, perfectly still, and it seemed to be oriented toward the house, toward the window. The light went off. I stayed where I was. My eyes tried to adjust, but the sudden dark after the floodlight's glare made the yard a solid black rectangle. The light came on again, the shape was gone, or it had moved. I scanned the yard and couldn't find it. The swing set, the shed, the grass, everything was exactly the same, but whatever had been at the edge of the light wasn't there anymore. I stood at that window for another 40 minutes. The light didn't come on again. The yard stayed dark. In the morning, I went outside. The grass was wet with dew, and I walked the yard looking for anything. Tracks, flattened patches, anything out of place. Near the back, about where I estimated the shape had been, the grass was pressed down in a rough area about the size of a person lying on their side. It could have been a deer bed. Deer do that. They bed down in open yards, especially in October when the fields are bare, but there were no tracks leading to it or away from it. A deer leaves a trail in wet grass. This was just a pressed down patch with untouched grass on every side, as though whatever had made it had been very careful about how it arrived and how it left. I adjusted the floodlight sensitivity that afternoon. I also installed a camera. In the 3 weeks that followed, the camera caught deer twice, a raccoon 4 times, and one blurry image at 4 in the morning on a Wednesday that might have been a person standing at the tree line, or it might have been a fence post I didn't remember being there. The image was too dark and too compressed to tell. My wife asked me why I was suddenly leaving the back porch light on all night. I told her it was for the animals. She doesn't know I also started locking the shed. I went out to get the lawnmower the day after that first night, and I found the shed door unlocked. I always lock it. There was nothing missing inside. Everything was exactly where it should have been. But when I stepped in, the air felt different. Close. Warm. Like the door had been shut with someone inside for a long time. I bought a better camera. I put a padlock on the shed. I started sleeping with our bedroom door locked, something I'd never done in 8 years of living in that house. And some nights, when I get up for water at 3 in the morning, I don't look out the kitchen window anymore. Because I realized something that's hard to explain. I realized that every time the floodlight came on that first night, I had been standing in a dark kitchen, looking out into a lit yard, which means if someone had been out there, they wouldn't have been able to see me. But if they had been close enough to the house, closer than the sensor range, standing right up against the wall where the light doesn't reach, they would have heard me set my glass down on the counter. And the light didn't come on again until after I walked away.